Well, hello and welcome to another episode of More Perfect Marketing. It's David Baer here, and today we're going to be talking about stories. Now, I just got finished listening to another podcast recently, one of my favorite podcasts called the Marketing Book Podcast. If you're not familiar with it, I highly, highly recommend it. It gives you a lot of insight into the way that we think about marketing from a whole bunch of different angles. And on that podcast, there was an author, I think her name is Karen Eber, who recently wrote a book about the idea of story and the value of story as you're trying to pitch or position or change somebody's mind or simply start a relationship off in an effective manner. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and how the idea of stories really can enhance the way that you connect with prospects and clients and build a business based on the idea of story. To help me do this, because I'm not the expert here in this particular area, is Danielle R. Harris, who is joining me from the great state of Michigan. Hey, Danielle, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you because this is a topic that I think I can talk about. But you live this topic on an ongoing basis. You work with your clients in this area. And so I want to really dive into the idea of how story can be so effective and why it's so important. And perhaps, I don't know if this is the right setup or not, but I'm going to ask if you wouldn't mind starting by sharing your story so that we can get to know you a little bit first.
Well, story is always a great segue of introducing myself and how this is all going to culminate together. Let me start by saying that I have been in marketing for well over a decade. I started off in, interestingly enough, the concrete industry, where you're just like, well, there's a story there. There absolutely is. And from there, after working for more than a decade in that area, I decided that I wanted to help small businesses, entrepreneurs, nonprofits, help them market their own businesses. And so in that process, you're just like, well, how does story come into this? Well, it starts with as I was starting off and building my own business, trying to get more people interested in wanting to work with me. And my thought was, I have this experience in the concrete industry that no one cares about. Nobody wants to hear about my time in concrete. I'm going to start talking about my experience right now. I'm talk about that like, oh, I went to school for this for many years. I got my MBA, and that's like I have all of this credentialed experience, and I'm just going to talk about that going forward. I don't need to talk about my time doing all of these other things. And I realized that that was pretty dry. It was about as dry as concrete. And I realized, like, oh, that's nothing's happening because people aren't able to really get a grasp. Like, they can clearly see that I am knowledgeable about what it is that I'm talking about, but it feels like a lot of facts are being put out there, put a lot of just dry, basic information. There's no meat that really draws people in. And it wasn't until I started in dribs and drabs talking about my experience and my expertise and the things that I was doing in my previous career, things that I had just in passing been able to do through marketing, that people started to perk up a little bit. They started to notice, they started to ask more questions. And it was then that I realized, like, oh, yeah, I guess my story is important. I guess my story does matter. And then I was looking and studying a lot of other entrepreneurs, a lot of other people that had grown their own brands and businesses in multiple different fields. And the core of it is that they all have a good story that draws people in. And that's what is remembered. Yes, there are a whole bunch of other things like, oh, yeah, they're good at what they do this, they do that. But what gets people really compelled to want to talk about a particular person, a particular brand, a particular anything is that there's a good story behind it that's memorable that people can relate to. And from there, I was like, okay, well, this is what I need to do for my own business. And so I started talking about more like, oh yeah, how I went to Dubai multiple times in a year to help set up international branches of the concrete organization. How I know way too much about concrete in general. How my interview question when I first started as an intern was, do I know the difference between concrete and cement? I talked about how I've been able to do a lot of production of events and marketing of different events for uh, if I'm able to talk about books about concrete, then I'm able to talk about how whatever it is that you do in an interesting way, because whatever it is that you do has to be more interesting than concrete. And because of that, people were kind of centered around that aspect. People were just like, oh, yeah, that is true. I am more interesting than that. And that story is what people are compelled about. I have people that want to start working with me all the time. They're just like, do you have a story about this? This is interesting. I want to hear more about that. It was something that I never would have initially thought. It was something that I honestly didn't ever want to talk about because I was like, I was beyond that. I'm moving beyond that. But it was that aspect of my story, plus all of my other experiences that people were just like, yes, I like her. I wanna work with her. She clearly knows what she's talking about, and she has such a diversified background, and that's the what I need to be working with to grow my business. So that's a little bit about me, my background. But yeah, it was because I realized for myself that, no, people care. People care about the story. People realize the value behind it. And it's because of that, it gives more legitimacy to what it is that I do. Just me having that knowledge and spitting it out isn't going to do anything. It's having something to grasp onto and kind of connect with and has this interest point that's going to get people to have interest and want to work with you.
There's so much that I want to like circle back on from what you just shared there, but I want to make the following point because I imagine that anybody listening or watching probably zeroed in on a couple of things that you said, as I did. There's a copywriter who I often will mention on this show, a guy named Gary Bencivenga, who talks about different proof elements, and the most powerful proof element in copywriting and in marketing materials that he talks about is demonstration. And you just demonstrated how to tell a story, describe situations where you painted pictures. Like, I want to start talking about Dubai with you and I want to understand like what those experiences were about. I have, a silly funny anecdote about the difference between cement and concrete, that I had with my daughter at one point where I was trying to describe it to her and then I realized I don't actually know the difference, right? So there were things that connected the two of us simply by you going through that story right then and there. And so I think to a certain extent, like you've just proven the point that human connection came out of just sharing a little bit about yourself. And I'm gonna hog the mic for another moment. You're the expert here, but you taught me that something that just happened to me last night is actually exactly what you're talking about when it comes to story. I was at a networking event here in Portland, Oregon, and I went through sort of my personal background as I was talking to some of the people. And I said, well, I used to be a wine marketer in New York City. And one person pipes up and goes, oh, you were in wine in New York? I was the wine buyer at such and such a restaurant. I go, oh, yeah. Well, I know who your sales rep was. And then like I told him the name of the sales. Oh, yeah, I remember Tim. I loved Tim. And so we bonded. And of course, now we have a follow-up conversation scheduled for next week to discuss the work that I do now and could I help him with the services. That came out of a story.
Exactly. That exactly proved the point, which it might not have happened if you didn't happen to say, like, oh, yeah, this is what I used to do in the past. And I work with so many people, particularly I work with a lot of the coaches in the online space where it's a second career for them. And they are thinking that if they think about their previous career, if it was, I was a doctor, I was a lawyer, and now I'm doing something that's completely different, just like I want to have legitimacy in what I'm doing right now. So let me not talk about the past. Whereas it is directly the past that's going to give legitimacy to the present of what you're doing right now. And so a lot of people in other spaces are just like, well, I've been doing this for years and years and years. I don't have any other like crazy pivots or anything, but it's still experiences that you've had along the way that are going to give more depth and have people to latch on. It could be from personal, it could be professional, it could be like, oh yeah, I did a little stint over here but came back. All of that gives a richness to your own story and experience, and it's worth sharing.
So you jumped from the construction concrete world, and by the way, I network with a lot of folks in the construction world here in Oregon. I'm very active in an organization called the Oregon Association of Minority Entrepreneurs, which happens to be like the hub of the construction industry here. So I actually know a bunch of people in concrete. Well, not physically, not anyway. Um, Physically in concrete. Anyway, you get the idea. But I'm curious how you made the transition from the work that you had been doing in that industry to serving entrepreneurs at sort of a very different world, and what prompted you to go in the direction that you went in.
Mm. So, on one hand, it does seem like it's a big shift. In my head, it was not. It seemed like, oh, it was a natural progression, which tends to happen with a lot of people when they're thinking, like, oh, it's such a big shift. But, like, a lot of times in your head, and other people kind of say, like, oh, well, I see a through line. Like, I'm still working in the marketing space. But what I found is that I wanted to have more variety. I was working for same organization. I would switch different things. I would work on one product, go over to one event, head over managing the global operations of the marketing function for, the Middle East or Europe or South America. So like I had a variety of there, but I realized that I wanted to help people that didn't know as much about marketing. There were people that I would talk to in the community and they were just like, "Oh, you know about this? Like I could really use some help with that." And I would always think about like, "Oh, that sounds like fun. Like I would love to help out people that are doing work that's so meaningful to them." And so they have so much passion for it, but their gift isn't marketing. And they're just like, oh, I would really love to have some more effort on this. Like I work with someone who works in the art space, and their gift is being in the arts, not in marketing. And so being able to pair and work together with someone that has so much passion for that, that gives me a lot of joy in and of itself. And then being able to mix that. So for people that are educators, for people that, like I said, are in the art space, for people that are helping other people transition into careers. So there's so much variety. And I was just like, that's what I want to be able to do, to help empower a lot of other people that it's their dream to grow and build a business. But there's one skill set there. Just like I'm not exactly there yet, but I know that this will take me to the next level. Me partnering with them, that gives me so much joy. So although on one hand you're just like that's a big pivot, it's always been one of those like, but I like it, I love it. And so it just made so much sense, like all of these skills that I picked up, whether it seems like, well, you were working at concrete, but if I was able to do that, like I said, then I'm able to do a lot of other things. I did event work, I did um a lot of conferences, I was able to launch products. All of those things were directly transferable over to what I was doing with the clients that I work with now. So for me, it was just like, oh yeah, it makes total sense.
And I think as a the content of the work that you're doing, there's also this mindset shift or going from, and I imagine for a lot of your clients as well, from being an employee, right, in an organization with a paycheck that's coming in, to the one who's responsible for, getting up every day and making sure that the business continues to be sustainable and gets built. And you had to transition into that, world as well. And that, can, for all of us, I myself included, that's not necessarily something that comes naturally to any business owner.
No, yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things that I'm good at what I do. And at the same time, it's like, well, why can't other people see through the things that I'm putting out there that I'm so good at what I do? And it's like, you're right, it's a different skill set. It's even a different skill set to thinking about yourself as the marketing person within an established organization to a marketing person in growing a organization, of growing a business that doesn't have years and years worth of a proven and track record, which is why going back to story is so important. Because if you don't have like, oh yeah, I've been doing this, we've been a pillar in the community for 30 years, if you don't have that type of story, then what is it that's going to get people to say like, oh yeah, like I want to trust you, I want to work with you, which is why I think that's so important, which is why organizations that have a really great brand story, like they have a brand story, like, oh yeah, we are known for doing this. Like that is their story in that big corporate sense. So how can you pare it down to yourself as a brand, as an individual? Like what is your personal brand story and how you can use that and leverage that to grow your business, grow your network, grow whatever it is that you're currently working on.
So thank you for bringing us back to the point of our conversation, which is story. I wanted to ask you about sort of the functional application of story in different stages of a business, and using the types of clients that you're serving, who are either, in the case of an artist creator, or coaches who are providing services to others. um, where does story fit into their business? You talked a little bit about sort of the personal brand story, but I imagine that there's sort of a functional place for introducing them, maybe even in sales, maybe even in the building relationship or retention. Can you talk sort of through where story fits?
Yeah. So it fits at every place of it. The types of stories that you tell along the way, those will evolve. So a lot of times when you're first starting off, it's what's going to really grab and bring in the attention. So if there's the traditional I help statement, I help X people get Y solution. And that's essentially a story of like, oh, this is what it is that I do. But then if you want to go in deeper, you're talking about your level of expertise. Oh yeah, I do these types of things and this is how I help them to go towards this path. And I've helped X amount of people been able to get such and such a result. And then you go further deeper down into the path and they're getting ready to have a sale. And you're telling the story of how someone was able to overcome whatever it was that was blocking them. Maybe you're a person that helps people with finances and you're saying like, oh yeah, well, I helped this person, they were in so much debt, they were in $50,000 worth of debt, and we were able to overcome that and they were able to pay off and do all of these other things. Like those are the types of stories that you're able to tell to help people bring in confidence that you're able to get them the result. Really, the goal of story overall is to show possibility of what can happen, and so the different stories that you tell along the way are just going to reinforce the the possibility that's out there of the I help statement of I help person A go from here to here. That's a possibility like, oh, I didn't even know there's like this level of awareness. And then you have like your credibility stories of like, oh yeah, like this is how I was able to do this. I was in your position or I helped many other people in that same way. And then you have like your real confident story of I worked with someone that was just like you, get a result that you're after. And so those types of stories all working together help to build this confidence, show the possibility, and then able to build up and say, like, oh yeah, like I want to work with this person. I remember the stories that they're telling me. And so I feel like I can get the thing that I want if I'm working with them.
I'm thinking about how you're putting story in a few different roles there, and thinking, gosh, I've just had this conversation with one of the folks I serve about using stories to be more effective at communicating a point. And his answer was something like, well, yeah, I haven't collected enough stories like you, David, so I'm not there yet. How does somebody start the process of figuring out, like, what are the stories I'm going to tell? You've just given a bunch of really great examples of the stories. Organize them, figure out how and where to apply them. Like, do you have some thoughts on or a method for managing all of the stories that you want to put in place in a business?
There are a couple different things because I hear the exact same thing. People saying, well, I haven't worked with enough people. And then it's what number is enough. Oh, I need to have at least 100 different stories before I start going. And I don't think that's the case. I think that really it starts with for I'll speak to my clients and it could be different depending, but a lot of times like they are their own best case study or one person can be their best case study. And then the more information data that you collect, it goes back to prove that. And so what I do is I have a client management system, and I am looking through and I'm writing down notes of here are the different obstacles and here are the different things that came up. And I look at them on some frequency and say, like, okay, like what are the trends between them? And it could be like, okay, like I've worked with three people recently and they wanted to launch a brand new product. And so they were hitting kind of similar benchmarks along the way. I was like, oh, so what's that story that's there and how did I help them? So really, if you're going back, like, what does that look like of collecting? It's not that you have so much, it's making sure that you're able to recognize a pattern. So how are you documenting that there is even a pattern to go back and look at? And so do you have a client management system? Do you even just have a notebook that you're taking notes in? Are you going back and looking at those notes that you're taking and then seeing like, okay, how can I summarize this into a story? Where were they at the beginning? What were some frustrations that they had in the middle? And what was the solution that I was able to give them at the end? And where are the patterns in between of like, oh yeah, people are similarly going through these same, beginning, middle, end points. And so this is a story that I can tell. These are the similarities between all of them. But it does start with you documenting what it is that you're doing, but it doesn't mean that you need to have, no, I need to have at least 10, I need to have at least like 50, I need to have 100. Whatever it is that you do have, what are the patterns and similarities between all of them?
You talk about patterns, and that immediately, brings to my mind the importance of consistency in a business.
Mm-hmm.
And God, I was going to go down a different path here, but I want to understand kind of stories are very useful in lots of different places, as we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
How, for somebody who is new to using this as a mechanism in communication, how important is it to sort of build it into their regular ongoing routine and be consistent about communicating through story? And how do you build that habit?
So, like anything else, it's like you said, it's a habit, it's a skill, and it takes practice. And I think it's all about starting off with what is one thing that I like. I'm pretty sure that this is going to be something that really connects with people and trying it out. I think a lot of times people are afraid that I'm going to tell the story and it's gonna not going to land the way that I want to, and so this plan sucks, and I'm going to abandon it all. No, it's starting off with like based off of what I know about people, I think this is a pretty good shot. And I'm going to tell it and I'm going to see what the response is. And then I'm going to try it again. Now, how do you get that into your ongoing like working habit of it? I Something that I tell my clients a lot is if they are talking about something in general terms, how can they be more specific in iterating that same point through a story? So, if you were going to talk about, like, oh, at a high level, I'm going to be talking about marketing that is going to help you to see more clicks on your website. So
Mhm.
if you're talking about like, oh yeah, if you do the X, Y, and Z things, you'll have more click-throughs. Well, what is a story that you can tell about either yourself or a client where they went through the same process of just the facts and then say like, okay, and this is the result that they had. Because then it goes back to the creating the possibility as opposed to like do XYZ type things and then you will have the result. How can you say that same thing with a story that reinforces that is the possibility? So as far as like, oh, like 3 times a week you should be doing that, I don't necessarily believe in that. I more so believe in where are you finding the spaces where you could swap out and
Mhm.
then getting more consistent, saying like, okay, I want to try this over here. Oh yeah, this worked really well over here. Let me try it over there. As far as like a fast and true rule, like 3 times a week you should be practicing your stories. That works for you. I say go for it, but also at the same time, I like to think of like, okay, where's a time where you can pause and say like, I think I could pull out a story that illustrates the same point, the same if not better.
All right. I want to talk a little bit about the story that you tell to your clients. And
Hmm.
to do that, I want to leverage what you have as the current homepage of your website, where it says that your headline is "Some marketers chase fads. I believe in mastering the fundamentals." And there's there's a key storytelling. We haven't been talking about storytelling as much as stories, right? Principle here, which is that you have created conflict by creating an enemy, right? What we refer to as a common enemy in our world. And that's that some marketers, right? Those other guys, not me, chase fads. I don't believe in that. I believe in this other thing. What is the story you're telling there, and how do you reinforce that story?
Well, no, and this is something that I- I've seen a lot of people struggle with the fact that they cannot keep up with the latest newish trends. Oh, I'm in the online space, so I absolutely need to be on Threads because that's what Instagram and Meta just put out. Oh, I need to figure out how to do all these crazy videos. It's one of those things where on one hand there will be a time and a place where you need to adapt into what is happening and what is going on, but at the same time people jump to doing these fads and these trends at the expense of knowing the foundational things that's going to go across every single thing that they do. And so if I'm able to say, like, okay, what are the needs of your core people? What is it that they desire? What is it that they want? And if people aren't able to answer those questions, then it's going to be very difficult to, one, create marketing that's going to work for them. And then two, even be able to take advantage of any of the fads and the trends that are going on and using them effectively. So it's not that I'm anti fads, I'm anti using, going towards and focusing on that at the expense of knowing at the foundation, at the core, what are the fundamentals of marketing that's going to make things work. So we've been talking about story this entire time. I think that being able to tell a good story that's going to really connect with people is going to require you knowing at the core who are the people that you're trying to serve. It requires you knowing what it is that you sell, why that's important to the people that you want to serve, and how is that going to differentiate you? How are you delivering that different than everybody else that's out there? And if you know those core things, then you're able to start formulating a story that's going to be compelling to your people. Because the point of telling a story about yourself isn't for just like, oh yeah, I want to self promote and like I'm so interesting, I'm so important. Like that's not the overall goal of the story. The goal of the story is so that the people that you want to work with see that, like, oh yeah, like this is someone that I want to trust. If you're talking about the whole like the story guideline of, oh, you have your hero and then they have a conflict and then they meet a guide and they go through struggles and they do their whole rocky training sequence and something happens and then they have the pinnacle of it all and there's a resolution of it. Like the point of you telling your story is how you can be that guide for someone so the other person can be the hero of it all. And so you have to know what the plight of the hero is and how you can guide them in order to do that. So like that's the whole point of the story, not just to be like, I'm cool, I'm interesting, like you should know me, I should be in your circle. The whole point of it is so that other people are able to say, like, oh yeah, this is the person that I need by my side in order to accomplish the thing that I want to do.
Beautiful, and a shout out to both Joseph Campbell and Donald Miller there for that little reference in terms of the hero's journey, and then applying it in marketing. But I think that you talk a good bit about the value of sharing one's story in their marketing, leading to the growth of business, and just looking at the way that you position your business on your website, it gets some people to go, oh, I totally agree with this, I totally get it, now I want more, based on just understanding Danielle's philosophy. I This is somebody I trust. Whereas somebody who is shopping around for guidance on how to make the best TikTok video, they land on your site. It's not a good connection. It's not the right person necessarily, based on the way that you're projecting who you are.
Yeah, and that's, people think that blocking or not attracting people, like that's the wrong thing. That's actually the whole point of creating good marketing, is being able to call in the right people and repel back the people that aren't a good fit. That's the whole point of it being able to be a beacon. Some people think of like, oh, it's like a fence in the barrier. It's like,
Yeah.
no, like the people that are just like, oh yeah, like we're a good fit, like they're easily able to pass on through and want to and easily able to work with you. And the people that aren't, they're just like, oh, this doesn't resonate with what I want to do. Moving on to the next. And happy to let people go through to find someone that more closely aligns with what it is that they're after.
So for listeners who are finding alignment with what you've been sharing, where can they find out more? And I think you have a gift for those who would like to, connect with you and follow along with your story.
Yeah, so you can always learn more about me at my website, drharrisconsulting.com. If you want to connect with me on social media, you can find me on LinkedIn, Danielle R. Harris. You can find me on Instagram, Danielle.r.harris. You can also listen on my own podcast, Marketing That Works, available wherever you listen to podcasts. And finally, if you want to learn more about how you can incorporate your story into your own marketing, however it is that you currently market, whether it's how you do more in-person events, if you market yourself on in the digital space, but you really realize that, oh, I really need to incorporate my story into what it is that I'm doing. You can sign up for my email list. You can go to drharrisconsulting.com/story, sign up for my email list. And that's where I focus a lot on telling your story, using that effectively in your marketing and using that to grow your business.
Well, excellent. That's drharrisconsulting.com/story. And I have just requested to connect with you on LinkedIn. I didn't share a note. I hope you don't hold anything against me for that. And I'm on pins and needles waiting for the acceptance of my request. But in the meantime, I want to say thank you so much, Danielle R. Harris, for
Thank you
joining me
so
here on More
much.
Perfect Marketing. Yeah.
Yeah, great to have you interview me and have this whole great conversation. I loved it. It was great. Thanks, David.
Fantastic. Folks, if you know somebody who could benefit from listening to the conversation you just heard, please share it with them. Until next time, my name is David Baer. I can't speak very well today, but I assure you this is More Perfect Marketing, and I hope to see you back here again soon. Take care. Bye bye.